Now imagine this. It's 3:12 a.m. You're lying in bed. You are not asleep. You're not awake. You are in that gray, formless, nowhere place your brain doesn't have a good word for, so it just calls it tired. And then it happens. The weight leaves your body. Not gradually, not like drifting off, like someone pulled a plug. 1 second you are a bag of meat pinned to a mattress by gravity and bad decisions, and the next second you're not. You're light. You're nothing. You are a thought with no anchor. And you turn around. However, you're turning around because you don't have a body to turn with, and you see it. Yourself, face down, in the pillow, mouth slightly open, drooling, probably, because dignity doesn't survive REM sleep. For most of human history, there was exactly one explanation for this moment, and every culture on Earth landed on some version of it independently. That's your soul. It just left the building. Tonight, I'm going to tell you why that explanation is wrong, and then I'm going to tell you the actual answer, which, I promise you, is somehow creepier. Because it's not that your soul left your body, it's that your brain forgot where it put you. Let's sit in a horror for a second. Because a horror is the whole reason this myth survived 4,000 years without a marketing budget. You know the sensation I opened with. Even if you've never had the full floating ceiling experience, you've had a piece of it. The falling dream that jolts you awake with your heart going. The moment you wake up and for one horrifying second, you don't know which way is up. That's the same glitch at a lower dose. And ancient cultures didn't have neuroscience, so they did what humans always do when they don't have an answer. They built a really elaborate one anyways. Ancient Egypt didn't think you were one thing, you were a whole committee. There was your Ren, your true name, which was basically a magic word that kept you alive as long as someone remembered to say it. There was your Ba, your personality, your individual flavor of being a person. And there was your Ka, your vital spark, your double, the part of you that could detach and wander, while the rest of you stayed home in bed like it had a decency to. The Ka was supposed to return by morning. If it didn't, well, that's a different, worse podcast episode. Now, fast forward to a few thousand years to Victorian England. Because the Victorians took a perfectly good ancient concept and gave it a whole subscription service. This is the era of Madame Blavatsky and the birth of what she called Theosophy. And the headline product of the whole movement was astral projection. The idea that your physical body and your astral body are connected at all times by something called the silver cord. Elastic, unbreakable, except in one very specific very convenient sets of circumstances that always seems to line up with whatever the medium at the seance needed that week. You could travel while asleep, visit distant places, even visit the dead, and as long as that silver cord stayed intact, you'd always snap back before you actually technically legally died. It's an incredible business model. When you think about it, you cannot disprove someone's astral trip. There's no receipt. There's no custom stamps. It's the perfect Victorian parlor trick dressed up as cosmetology. And rich, bored people in gaslight drawing rooms ate it up by candlelight because the alternative was talking to their spouse. And here's the thing, the myth didn't die with the corsets and gas lamps. It mutated. It got a government budget. In the 1970s, the CIA ran a real declassified program called the Gateway Process, which, and I want to be very clear that I am not making this up for content, attempted to use audio technology to induce altered states of consciousness in personnel, including states resembling astral projection, with the actual stated goal of potentially using out-of-body perception for intelligence gathering. Grown adults, government funding, trying to teleport their consciousness into the Kremlin using tape hiss and vibes. It didn't work. Obviously, it didn't work. But it did do something incredibly useful for us tonight. It kept a myth alive in the public imagination long enough to survive into the internet age, where it's fused with sleep paralysis forums and creepypasta and turn it into the version you probably heard that scientists secretly proved the soul can leave the body, usually stapled to a stock photo of a glowing silhouette standing over a sleeping person, posted by an account with 11 followers and a crystal emoji in its bio. So that's the lore. That's the 4,000 years of humanity staring at the exact same experience and going, yep, soul stuff. Case closed. Here's where it gets good. Here's where a Swiss neurologist accidentally proved something far weirder than any of them guessed, not by meditating for 30 years in a cave, but by pointing at 2 milliamp current at exactly the wrong part of someone's skull. Before we get into the lab, I need you to sit with an uncomfortable question. Where are you right now? Not what room you're in, where, inside yourself. Are you behind your eyes? Somewhere in the middle of your skull, like a pilot in a cockpit? Most people, when you actually make them sit and think about it, land somewhere just behind and between the eyes. There's no organ there. There's no self module you can point to on a diagram. That feeling, the feeling of being located somewhere specifically in your own head, it's not a fact about your anatomy. It's a construction. Your brain is building it, fresh, every single second out of raw sensory garbage. And it is so good at the job that you have never once questioned the finished product. Here's the raw material it's working with. Proprioception, your brain's ability to know exactly where your limbs are in space without looking at them. Close your eyes right now and touch your nose. You did that with zero visual information. That's proprioception, and it's constantly streaming data. The vestibular system, fluid-filled canals in your inner ear acting as a biological gyroscope and accelerometer, telling your brain which way is down, whether you're accelerating, whether you're tipping over. Visual input. Obviously, all three of these streams get funneled into one specific piece of brain real estate, the temporoparietal junction, or TPJ, sitting right where your temporal lobe, which handles sensory processing and memory, meets your parietal lobe, which handles spatial awareness. The TPJ's entire job, its one function, the reason it exists, is to take all three of those input streams and fuse them into a single, seamless conclusion. I am here, inside this body, looking out through these eyes. It doesn't sound, it does this so fast, it's constantly and so invisibly that you have never once experienced the raw data. You've only ever experienced the finished product. You think, I am inside my body, the same way you think the sky is blue. Like it's just a fact about the universe, not a live calculation. Your brain is running 30 times a second. Now, what happens when you fall asleep? Your body does something called muscle atony, a deliberate total paralysis of your voluntary muscles, engineered specifically so you don't get up and act out your dreams and put a lamp through a window. It's a safety feature, but atony doesn't ask your proprioceptive system for permission. It just cuts the signal. Your muscles go quiet. Your inner ear says you're lying perfectly still. And meanwhile, your dreaming visual cortex is generating full, vivid, moving imagery because nobody told that department the shop was closed early. So the TPJ is sitting there trying to do its one job, locate the self. And it's getting three completely contradictory reports. Muscles, nothing. Inner ear, stillness. Visual cortex, motion. Imagery, a whole unauthorized dream in progress. It cannot reconcile the data. So it does what any overwhelmed system does when the inputs stops making sense. It guesses. And then guess it lands on is more often than any sane person would predict is you are no longer where your body is. You are floating slightly above it. That's the whole trick. That's the entire myth of astral projection, reduced to a data reconciliation error in a chunk of tissue the size of a walnut. Now, I promise you a lab. Let's go to Geneva. 2002, University Hospital of Geneva, Dr. Olaf Blanc is treating a 43-year-old woman with severe drug-resistant epilepsy. To find the exact origin point of her seizures, the surgical team has to do something generally medieval sounding for how modern it is. They place fine electrodes directly into the surface of her living, exposed, fully conscious brain, and they start testing different regions with small electrical pulses, watching for a reaction while she, awake, talking, aware, tells them what she's experiencing. They hit her right temporal parietal junction. And she says, I'm not paraphrasing, this is close to her actual reported words. I see myself lying in bed from above, but I only see my legs and my lower trunk. Blank, being a scientist and not a man who panics easily, adjusts the current. Lower intensity, she reports sinking into the bed or falling from a height. Higher intensity, full detachment. She's on the ceiling, watching. Turn the current off, she's back, instantly. No transition, no drifting down, just the ceiling, then in her body, like flipping a switch, because that is exactly what it was. Let that sit for a second. This is the single most direct evidence available that the floating out-of-body sensation, the exact experience that anchored 4,000 years of soul mythology, is not a spiritual event. It is not a threshold experience. It is a reproducible electrical phenomenon in a specific 2-centimeter patch of cortex. And a man in a lab coat can turn it on and off with a dial like he's adjusting a thermostat. We didn't discover the soul. We discovered the light switch. And it gets one shade worse. Because right next door to the TPJ, practically sharing a wall, is a region called the angular gyrus. And when Blank's stimulation bled slightly into that neighborhood, instead, something different happened. Something you've almost certainly heard, even if you didn't know neuroscience behind it. Patients with disruption in the angular gyrus don't just feel like they're floating. They feel like there's someone else in the room, standing behind them, mimicking their posture, just slightly out of sync, always just outside, direct line of sight. Sound familiar? That's the shadow person. That's the entity at the foot of the bed during sleep paralysis, the presence millions of people across every culture and every era have independently reported and described in almost identical terms. Here's what's actually happening. The angular gyrus is responsible for maintaining your body schema, your brain's internal map of your own physical posture and boundaries. When the mapping breaks down during the same kind of sensory desynchronization we just talked about, your brain still senses a body-shaped presence nearby. It just can't correctly tag the presence as you. So it does what the brain does with unassigned data. It externalizes it. It builds a second figure out of the leftover signal and places it just behind you in the one spot you can't verify with your eyes. The thing standing at the foot of your bed at 4 a.m. isn't a demon. It's a corrupted file of yourself, rendered by your own brain, and filled under "not me" by mistake. Which, if you think about it, might be worse. Naturally, once this research went public, an entire cottage industry of astral projection coaches quietly declined to update their marketing. You can still find people selling multi-week astral travel mastery courses online. And none of them mentioned that a Swiss neurologist can produce the identical sensation in under 1 second using hospital equipment in zero enlightenment. I'm not saying meditation doesn't do anything. I'm saying if your out of body experience can be replicated by a man with a 9-volt battery and a bad bedside manner, maybe pump the brakes on the cosmic significance. So the soul doesn't leave the body. The body's sense of itself is just glitches. Fine, that's unsettling enough on its own. But here's where modern research takes it somewhere generally stranger. Because it turns out you don't need epilepsy, brain surgery, or an exposed cortex to break this system. You can do it awake in a chair with a webcam. 2007, neuroscientist Henrik Urson runs an experiment that is, frankly, diabolical in its simplicity. A subject sits in a chair wearing a VR headset. That headset is streaming live video, not from their own eyes, but from a camera mounted about 2 meters behind them, pointed at their own back. So the subject is looking at themselves from behind. In real time, from the subject's perspective, they are now looking at somebody else's body sitting in a chair. It just happens to be wearing their clothes and copying their every move perfectly. Because it's them. Then the experiment takes 2 plastic rods and starts stroking the subject's actual chest with one, whilst simultaneously in perfect sync, same rhythm, same timing, stroking the empty air directly under the camera lens with the other, where the avatar's chest would be. Within seconds, and I mean seconds, this is not a slow burn. The brain gives up trying to reconcile the 2 data streams and does the same thing that TPJ did in Blank's lab. It picks a visual story over the physical one. The subject's sense of self migrates. They stop feeling like they're sitting in a chair. They start feeling like they are standing 2 meters away, watching a stranger who happens to be wearing their face. And then Erson does the part that should probably require a waiver. He takes a hammer and swings it towards the empty space where the avatar is standing. The subject's heart rate spikes. Skin conductively spikes. That's the same measurement lie detectors use for stress response. Full psychological panic. Not because anything touches their actual body, because their brain has, in a span of about 10 seconds, relocated their entire sense of self into a patch of empty air based on nothing but synced visual and tactical cues. And it is now defending that location like it's the only body it's got. You don't need a soul that can travel. You need about 11 seconds of mismatched sensory input and a stranger with 2 plastic rods. Here's what I want you to leave with tonight. You've spent your whole life thinking of yourself as a pilot, something small and solid, sitting behind your eyes, looking out at the world through a body. It drives around like a rental car. That feeling is so constant, so unbroken, so obviously true that it's never once occurred to you to question it. It's not true, not in a way you think. There's no pilot, there's no cockpit. There's a walnut-sized piece of tissue behind your ear running a full-time reconciliation job on 3 separate streams of noisy, contradictory sensory data and building fresh every second with no version history, the illusion that you are somewhere specific, inside something solid, looking out through 2 specific holes. Most of the time, the illusion is airtight. You never see the seams. But sometimes, when you're falling asleep, when your muscles go quiet before your mind does, when a Swiss neurologist touches a wire to exactly the wrong spot, when a stranger sinks 2 rods to a camera 2 meters behind your back, the seams show, and for one disorienting second, you get to see the machinery underneath the magic trick. For 4,000 years, humans looked at that gap in the illusion and called it proof of the soul, proof that something in us is bigger than the meat, something that can slip its leash and wander the room while the body sleeps it off. I'd argue the truth is stranger and honestly a little more humbling. You were never a soul wearing a body like a coat. You are a hallucination. Your brain works very, very hard to maintain every single second without ever once telling you it's working. And when you sleep, when the muscles cut out, when the eyes stop reporting, when the inner ear goes still, the hallucination doesn't shatter into some deeper truth about the universe. It just glitches. And for one floating ceiling eye view moment, before your brain reboots and slots you back behind your own eyes like nothing happened, you get to watch yourself drool into a pillow from 4 feet up. That's not your soul leaving. That's just a regular day for your nervous system. Anyways, guys, the reason for this whole episode tonight is something came across my feed of scientists claiming that when you go to sleep, they proved that your soul leaves your body and goes into this other kind of plane. And they're trying to figure out when it gets there, what it does. So I try to look it up to see, was there an update? Did they ever figure it out? I could not find any solid proof that was ever proven, ever existed, ever even really experimented on anytime recently. But I know some of you out there listening have had astral projection, or you have left your body. Let me know what you guys think. Reach out to me. If you do find anything, let me know. If you have experiences also, let me know. I'd love to hear them. But reach out to me. You can contact me on my Facebook page. Just message me there. Or you can also send an email to phantomnavigatorpodcast@gmail.com. And that's it. Good night. Don't look behind you.